again. It's me. It's Miranda, and today I'm going to be answering some of your questions about my first year of training on the Clinical Psychology doctorate. That's right. Here is the tea. And I'm going to be spilling it. Actually, wait a second. Before we get into the spilling of hot beverages, I just wanted to cover some basic information about my first year of training. Many of you will well know that the doctorate comprises of 4 core placements. That's adult, older adult, learning disability and child placements before you do a specialist placement in your 3rd year. So in my first year, I covered my adult placement where I worked in a CMHT and my child placement where I worked in CAMS. Each of these placements is around 5 months, and in my course they're preceded by a dedicated teaching block of around 4 weeks, which will prepare you for working with that client group. Once you're on placement, this is what the split looks like. So I worked 3 days a week at the NHS service, and then 2 days were dedicated either to teaching or to a study day. The final thing that I wanted to address before moving on to the questions was the fact that my adult placement took place under completely normal circumstances, whereas my child placement coincided with when the world imploded, so that ended up being completely remote. My teaching, my entire placement took place from the comfort of my own home. So I imagine I'll speak about that more when we get to the questions, so enough from me, let's dive right into it. Right, so the first question I have is, what is the workload like? I feel like I'm going to watch this video back when I finish my 2nd year and I'll be like, you naive, silly little girl. But having finished my 1st year, I'm going to say that it's actually fairly manageable. And I think something that I really like about training is that they have the time built in for you to do things. So when we had exams, we had study leave. When we need to be doing our research performance, we've got time allocated to that. And I actually haven't had a day so far where I've worked outside my 9 to 5 hours. Now, I know that this will change as things get a little more spicy. But I think if you're a person who is really boundaried and actually can't work into evenings because of other responsibilities that you have, / you want to lead a life, I think you're going to be more than able to do this. Probably part of it is just trying to readjust and recalibrate to the expectations of the course. So when you're training, there is no prize for coming top of the class, for getting a first, for getting a distinction. Everything is just like pass or fail. So I think if you've got that in mind and you know that you just need to produce a piece of work that is good enough, that meets the requirements, and you're not obsessed with this idea of having to produce a masterpiece every single time, I feel like you'll manage pretty well. Okay, so the second question I have is, what was it like moving city for the doctorate? Yeah, it wasn't easy, and I say that knowing I didn't make it particularly easy for myself. So I picked a city which was really far from home. I didn't have any existing friends in that city, and I hadn't actually organised any permanent living arrangements by the time I'd arrived. So all of that made for kind of a lot of stress, and I just remember this feeling of being lost all the time, just like constantly lost, not having a clue where I was going or what I was doing. I was just moving around the city like... Starting the course is quite an emotional experience, or at least I found it that way, and it was hard to do without having sort of any of my core close friends close by. Like, I remember my other half just calling me up being like, have you made any friends today? And I was like,
stop asking me that, that's such a triggering question.
And it is really tough, but I think the turning point was for me when I'd actually started to make some really good relationships with people on my course, and then suddenly I felt like I could take on the world. So yeah, if you're considering moving city and you're up for an adventure like I was, do that, but maybe do it with like a bit more planning and consideration than what I did. I think the juice was worth the squeeze in the end. I probably just made it more upsetting than it needed to be. Right, so the next question is, did you have much responsibility straight away? Yes, would be the short answer to that question. So within my first week of my first placement, I already started to build a caseload, and within a couple of weeks I was working with 6 different people, just independently, doing therapy. And actually, as much as that felt really nerve-wracking, and I think in my mind I was like,
I'm not ready.
you are ready. I think this is true of trainees across the country, that more often than not, our competence far outstrips our confidence. And actually, you very, very quickly adjust this new level of responsibility, and you've always got, supervision and just general discussions within the office, or maybe not so much anymore, but via telephone, with the people that you're working with to get that support. So it's actually fine. Okay, on to the next question, which is, what's your most embarrassing moment? I mean, these aren't going to be suitable for the internet. I did have a bit of an embarrassing moment the other day. So I'm starting my next placement, which is going to be in critical care. So I was speaking to my new supervisor, who was just telling me about the differences working in critical care, and he was like, we'll be wearing scrubs, you'll be going in fully kitted out in proper medical gear, and I wanted to show some enthusiasm for that idea. So the words that came out of my mouth were just like, oh great, I love a uniform. Ooh, I know it's only a small thing, but just every time I think about it, I'm like,
no! God, please, no! No! No!
Yeah, anyway, that is just classic foot and mouth technique from Miranda. So let's move on. Okay, shaking off that cringe, the next question is, what was training like during lockdown? I think we can say, it's disappointing, really, isn't it? This is the pinnacle of our career so far. We've all worked so hard to be here, and you just don't imagine that 6 months of it is going to be taking place from, your flat. Really? Do you? It's a bit underwhelming. I think with all of that said, I had a really good child placement in reality. I did loads of clinical work. I felt like I was able to still build really meaningful relationships with people, still got some really nice outcomes in my therapy cases. I think what I would say is that there is variability across services. Some services have been able to adapt kind of faster than others. And I think working with certain populations will be easier. I found that working with children and teenagers remotely actually quite fine. They're great with technology, but I can see how that might be a little bit trickier if you're in your LD or older adult placement. So we're just gonna see how it all pans out. I think out of all of it, this is one hell of an experience to go through, and if anything shows flexibility and adaptability, this is it. Okay, so next up we've got what has been the hardest part of training so far. Do you know what, actually, despite all of this corona malarkey that's happening at the moment, the thing that I have found hard is moving every 6 months, so moving on to a new placement. And I think part of it is just you've just built up some nice relationships with people, you've got to know your clients, everything's building to a nice momentum, you're kind of feeling comfortable in what you're doing, and then you've got to leave. It ends, just zoop, it's over. And I just find it so sort of disconcerting every single time. I remember when I was leaving I had to go into my child placement to hand in my work laptop, and I left, and I was just crying on public transport again, just honestly, there's just so many crying stories at the moment. But yeah, it's really tough. And I think part of it is that feeling of being assessed a lot. And I think there's that pressure of I need to go into a new placement. I need to show again that, I'm not a wayward person and that I can do what I'm meant to be doing. And I think just the kind of anticipation of having to do all of that again is really tough, and it's really exhausting, and I'm just not entirely sure that it's going to get that much easier, so you can look forward to that. Sorry guys. Moving on. Right, so now we've got what's it like to return to research and academia after a long break. I I really feel the anxieties around this question, but I'm just gonna say it now. You'll be absolutely fine. Like, I think one of the things that I really like about training is that when they say, you know, we don't assume any prior knowledge, what they mean is,
we do not assume any prior knowledge.
like, I was really surprised that in our first couple of weeks when we were thinking about our clinical skills, like, we took it right back to basics. You know, we were talking about things like what it's like to be a good listener and the different skills you need to be able to do that, which is like super important, but you know, it's basic stuff. And that is exactly the same with the academic and research components of the course. And that was super good for me because I was like very underconfident when it came to research. And I think when you go in, you're thinking about the fact that like, I'm gonna have to produce this thesis and I'll be doing a viva and I'll need to produce something that's like eligible for publication, but they break things down into manageable chunks. We actually started talking about research in our first month, which was a bit like, but it's good because then you just break things up and you start doing things like developing an idea, doing a research proposal, going through the ethics process, and before you know it, I've come to the end of my first year and I'm like, I've done quite a lot of work and it didn't feel really stressful, and at no point did I feel like it was beyond my capabilities. So yeah, you'll be golden. Alright, I think we've only got time for one more question again. Okay, so the question is, what has been the most surprising thing about the course and training so far? I would say the thing that surprised me most was just how much the course ends up bringing up your own stuff. Like, nobody really prepared me for that. And you just start to see some issues and past traumas which you thought were completely resolved sort of resurface a little bit, and you're just like,
Oh, hell no!
yes, seriously, not today, Satan, thank you very much. And I don't really know why that is, because we all do like psychologically infused jobs up until the point we get onto training, but I think it's something about the course, like it allows for a lot of discussion, self-reflection. In supervision you talk about kind of feelings that get brought up by the clients that you work with. You're also encouraged a lot to like put yourself in the role of the client and to think about how it would feel being asked these kinds of personal questions, which like I don't think you can avoid introspection in that scenario. And with the teaching you cover a lot of topics like, you know, depression, alcoholism, addiction, bipolar disorder, like so many hard-hitting topics. I think you'd be hard-pressed to get through your 3 years of training and not stumble across something that feels like it hits a little bit too close to home. Which I think, again, just makes a great case for having a very good support network when you're going into training, which is a nice mix of people who've got absolutely nothing to do with the course, but also your peer support within your cohort who know exactly what it's like and how hard it can be. Because there have been definitely points where I'm like,
I am coming apart at the seams.
but honestly, I think this is all a good thing. I do feel like I'm changing and growing a lot as an individual. And I think that's going to be a good thing. I mean, I guess we'll have to wait and see. So stay tuned. So that's all we have time for, I'm afraid. Sorry we didn't get through all of the questions. Again, I just do like to chunter on a bit too much, clearly. But something I did want to say, so this is my last segment for the webinars. So next week I'm going to be going off-piste, doing my own thing. So I will be talking about interviews, how to prepare for them, and how to knock them out of the ballpark, hopefully. So yeah, if you would like to follow that discussions and the discussions to come, Christ, please do subscribe to The Worry People, and I will look forward to speaking to you next week. Ciao for now. Bye. Right, so the next question I have is, did you have much responsibility straight away? Oh my God. Stop. Okay. So before we get into the spilling of hot beverages, I wanted to cover some basics of... So before we get into the spilling of hot beverages, I just wanted to cover some basics about my first year of The final thing that I want to address before moving on to the questions is the fact that my adult placement took place under... The final thing that I wanted to address...